Flight 470 takes off normally from Maputo Airport en route to Luanda, Angola. On board are 33 people, including passengers and crew. The weather is good, the plane is in perfect condition, and nothing seems out of the ordinary. Until the aircraft vanishes from radar without a trace in the middle of African airspace. Today, we travel to one of the most remote places on the African continent to revisit a story that should never have repeated itself. That of LAM Mozambique Flight 470. November 29th, 2013, Maputo International Airport, Mozambique. It's 11 a.m., and here, LAM Mozambique Flight 470 is waiting for clearance to taxi to its assigned runway. Flight 470 was a scheduled flight from Maputo International Airport, the capital's airport, bound for 4 de Fevereiro International Airport in Luanda, Angola. The estimated flight time was about 4 hours, covering a route predominantly over Namibia and Botswana, crossing the airspace of Bwabwata National Park in the narrow Caprivi Strip. It was a direct, non-stop route commonly flown between the two Lusophone countries. On board Flight 470 were 33 people, 27 passengers and 6 crew members. The nationalities included citizens of Mozambique, Angola, Portugal, France, Brazil, and China. The aircraft was an Embraer ERJ-190AR, tail number C9EMC. It was a Brazilian-made regional jet with a capacity of about 100 passengers, although only 27 passengers and 6 crew members were on this flight. The Embraer 190 is known for its reliability and modern technology, featuring a fully digital cockpit and advanced automatic flight control systems such as autopilot, autothrottle, and a flight management system. LAM Mozambique Airlines was the national airline of the country, founded in 1936. By 2013, it operated a modest fleet composed mainly of regional aircraft, like the Embraer 190. In previous years, the airline had faced criticism for its management and operational safety issues, leading to its inclusion on the European Union's blacklist of banned airlines. At the controls of the Embraer was Captain Herminio dos Santos Fernandes, 49 years old, with over 9,000 flight hours, about 2,500 of which were on the Embraer 190. At his side, as first officer, was Gracio Chimukile, only 24 years old, with over 1,100 flight hours, about 100 of which were on this same aircraft model. Both were qualified pilots, though with a marked generational and experience gap. At 11:26 a.m., Flight 470 finally began its takeoff roll. They lifted off without issue and began their climb to the assigned cruising altitude of 38,000 feet. In the cockpit, Captain Herminio dos Santos Fernandes and First Officer Gracio Chimukile carried out the standard procedures. The weather was excellent, the air was stable, and the aircraft responded precisely. During the first 100 minutes, the cockpit conversation was relaxed. They talked about politics, personal matters. It was a routine flight. The aircraft crossed into Botswana's airspace and reached its cruising altitude of 38,000 feet. Gaborone ACC assigned them a frequency and requested an estimate for waypoint Agram. Everything remained normal. But in the cockpit, something began to change. At 12:50, Gracio told the captain he needed to use the restroom. Herminio responded curtly, "No problem." The click of the cockpit door closing is heard, and also an electric click. The door has been locked from the inside. Herminio is alone. He stares at the main panel and turns the altitude selector. The setting changes from 38,000 feet to 4,288 feet. Just 16 seconds later, he turns the selector again, this time to 1,888 feet. A third turn sets it to 592 feet. That is, below the minimum safe altitude for the area. The aircraft, still on autopilot, interprets these settings as legitimate. At 1:08 p.m., the system switches to FLCH mode. It will begin a controlled descent to the pre-selected altitude. Herminio momentarily re-engages the autothrottle, just long enough to reduce the engines to idle, then manually disconnects it. Engine power drops to minimum. The descent is slow but steady. The plane is falling but without turbulence. It follows a smooth, clean profile and is entirely under control. Outside at the door, Gracio has returned from his break. He knocks. He bangs. No one answers. He tries again, hitting harder. Inside, Herminio remains silent. He has disabled the access code. The plane is losing altitude. Speed increases. Herminio takes manual control. At 1:11 p.m., he deploys the speed brakes, generating significant drag and reducing lift. The aircraft is now plunging at over 10,000 feet per minute. From the outside, the Gaborone ACC controller does not yet detect the anomaly. He is busy with other traffic. Nearly an hour passes without radio communication. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, the CVR records loud banging on the door. Up to 7 consecutive knocks are heard, followed by chime sounds. The first officer is trying to get in, but Herminio does not respond.
High speed.
The onboard computer begins to issue warnings.
High speed.
The alerts sound again and again. There is still time to recover control, but Herminio does not react.
High speed. High speed.
The control column remains unmoved. The recorders show 0 input on the controls. At 1:16 p.m., 26 minutes after the first officer left the cockpit, the plane crashes into the ground in Bwabwata National Park. It does so in level flight attitude, with both engines still running and landing gear retracted. The aircraft slides 487 meters across the savannah before disintegrating in a violent explosion. On the ground, villagers on the Botswana side see smoke rising in the distance. No one on board Flight 470 survived the explosion. After Flight 470 disappeared from radar, the Gaborone controller tries several times to re-establish contact, without success. At 3:05 p.m., nearly 2 hours after the last confirmed communication, the Luanda Control Center confirms the plane never entered its airspace. The worst is now feared. At 4:30 p.m., Namibian authorities received the official notification of a possible missing aircraft in their airspace. A search and rescue operation is launched, coordinated by Namibia's Air Traffic Control Service. But the location where the plane may have crashed is one of the most remote and inaccessible areas in southern Africa. Bwabwata National Park, a vast expanse of savanna and scrubland within the narrow Caprivi Strip, with no roads or infrastructure. To make matters worse, the region is hit by bad weather that evening. and night falls before helicopters or ground units can be deployed. At 9 a.m. the following day, November 30th, 2013, a search team locates the wreckage of the Embraer 190 among the trees. The fuselage is completely destroyed. The impact and subsequent fire have reduced the aircraft to rubble. There are no survivors. All occupants died instantly. Namibian authorities recover both flight recorders that same day. A complex forensic identification operation begins, due to the high degree of fragmentation of the human remains. The process stretches over weeks and involves specialists from several countries. Eventually, all the bodies are identified thanks to the work of Namibia's National Forensic Institute. The crash site is considered impassable for most of the year. After the initial investigation is completed, the wreckage is removed by a specialized company. Even a year later, teams return with drones to ensure that no trace of the impact remains and that the natural environment has been fully restored. What had happened? What was wrong with the captain? Did he crash the plane on purpose? From the very beginning, Namibian authorities understood that this was not a conventional accident. There was no Mayday call. The transponder was never set to code 7700, and the aircraft vanished without a trace in a remote region of Bwabwata National Park. Namibia's Directorate of Aircraft Accident Investigations, DAAI, took the lead in the investigation and notified all involved states, as established by ICAO Annex 13. Mozambique, state of registration and operator. Brazil, state of manufacture of the aircraft. Angola, destination state. Botswana, state with air traffic control at the time of the accident. And the United States, manufacturer of the engines. All sent representatives. The crash site was located the day after the accident, thanks to smoke reports from villagers on the Botswana side. When teams arrived, they found the aircraft completely destroyed by the force of the impact and the subsequent fire. Despite the devastation, both flight recorders were recovered. The two devices were sent to the NTSB laboratories in Washington. The decoding was successful and soon revealed an unexpected truth. The FDR showed that during the final 12 minutes of the flight, a series of manual actions were performed inside the cockpit. At 1:06 p.m., the pre-selected altitude was reduced in 3 stages, from 38,000 feet to 4,288, then to 1,888, and finally to 592 feet, an altitude below ground level in the Caprivi Strip region. The autopilot mode was manually switched to FLCH, flight level change. The autothrottle was disconnected, re-engaged, and then disconnected again. Each of these actions was manual, with no system fault alerts. The speed brakes were deployed and remained extended until the end, increasing the rate of descent to 10,560 feet per minute. The selected speed mode was changed from automatic to manual. The TLA, throttle lever angle parameter, showed that the throttles were first advanced and then reduced again to idle. Finally, both pressurization systems were deactivated, preventing the activation of the anti-ice system despite flying in icing conditions, triggering a secondary alert. All of this occurred while the autopilot remained engaged, and no effort was recorded from the pilot to regain manual control of the aircraft. The data showed a total absence of physical input on the control column. The audio recordings captured no conversations after the first officer left the cockpit to use the restroom. According to the records, at 110 minutes into the flight, the co-pilot requested permission to step out, and the captain responded, "No problem." After that, sounds of the door closing and the activation of the electric locking system can be heard. From then on, only clicks from the altitude selector, alarms, banging on the door, and repeated warnings from the GPWS system are audible. There was never a response. With mechanical, structural, weather-related, and ATC procedural errors ruled out, investigators focused on the human factor. They began a review of Captain Herminio dos Santos Fernandez's mental and emotional state. Interviews with colleagues and family revealed a troubling profile. He had been divorced for 10 years, and the process was still unresolved. His eldest son had died by suicide a year before the accident. He did not attend the funeral. His youngest daughter was recovering from heart surgery in South Africa. According to his last medical checkup, there were no clinical signs of incapacity, but he was advised to exercise more and improve his lifestyle habits. Despite these warning signs, there was no protocol in place to prevent emotionally unstable pilots from flying, as long as they passed the required medical and psychological exams. The captain held all necessary certifications. To verify that the actions seen in the FDR could be executed from a single seat, full simulations were conducted on a Level D Embraer simulator in Brazil. The tests confirmed that the entire descent profile could be performed solely from the captain's position. Recovery attempts were simulated following the first GPWS warning, and it was determined that there was enough time to avoid the crash had any action been taken. No system malfunctions were found that could have caused an unintentional descent. The official conclusion of Namibia's accident report was unequivocal. The inputs to the automatic flight system, made by the crew member who remained alone in the cockpit, believed to be the captain, caused the departure from cruise flight into a sustained controlled descent and subsequent collision with the terrain. Contributing factors identified included failure to comply with the two-person cockpit occupancy procedure, lack of mechanisms to prevent the complete locking of the cockpit door from the inside. The report made the following recommendations to Mozambique's Civil Aviation Authority. Strictly enforce the rule of maintaining 2 people in the cockpit at all times during flight. Request ICAO to study technologies or protocols that could mitigate threats originating from inside the cockpit. Strengthen mental health screening procedures for flight personnel, including ongoing psychological monitoring. Moreover, this accident went largely unnoticed. Until 2 years later, the Germanwings Flight 9525 incident occurred, in which the first officer committed suicide in a nearly identical manner. Then, the world looked back. The LAM 470 accident was one of the catalysts for implementing the mandatory 2-person cockpit rule in many airlines around the world, although the true trigger was the Germanwings case. It highlighted the urgent need to detect mental health issues in pilots and sparked debates on privacy, psychological health, and the boundaries of operational safety. The story of this flight became a warning that many ignored, until it was already too late. If you want to explore this story further, I recommend these sources. Official report by Namibia's DAI. The official report detailing the investigation's findings, including flight recorder analysis and conclusions about the causes of the accident. Air crash investigation. Cockpit killer. This episode of the well-known series Air Crash Investigation offers an in-depth look at Flight 470, focusing on the captain's decisions and the broader implications of the incident. Hard Landings Podcast, episode on Flight 470. This episode of the Hard Landings Podcast provides a detailed analysis of the accident, including both technical and human factors that contributed to the tragedy. Great Disasters Podcast, LAM Mozambique Flight 470. A podcast episode that examines the accident from a historical perspective, discussing the lessons learned and the safety measures that followed. Today we've traveled back to November 29th, 2013, when an Embraer 190 with 33 souls on board was lost forever in the African savannah. A silent tragedy, triggered from within the cockpit, that reminds us just how fragile trust can be. If you enjoyed this reconstruction, leave a like and your comments. They mean a lot to the channel.